Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again here at Sunnyside today. I'm Trevor Cameron, our general manager. Today we're talking about Nativars, cultivars of native plants, which should be an interesting subject. Say hi to Ben. He's in the background there handling the chat. And we have Mr. Smith, the whistling gardener, here with us again today, answering some questions during class. So hopefully that'll be of a help as well. We'll certainly be here after class for questions too. So we'll be showing a lot of slides today. We've got some pictures to show you, hopefully give you a few ideas on using nativars in your own landscape. If just a reminder, the classes are all recorded, so this will be recorded and posted up on our YouTube channel this afternoon. You can always go back and reference it, take a peek. If you missed it, you can watch it later. You know, all that's still in place. So we will have it up on our website here a little later this afternoon. Make sure hopefully everybody got the handout. Way too long. It's on the website. The verbiage part's nice and short, a page, but there's a pretty good plant list on here. A lot of them I'll show in the slideshow today, but some options, perennial shrubs, trees, some things that I would consider cultivars of natives or nativars that you may consider putting in your own landscape. If we kind of talk just at the beginning here before I do some slides, you know, really what is a nativar? It's kind of a funny name. It's not the avatar, but it's a nativar. You know, it's kind of an interesting debate in our industry, you know, between plant geeks, you know, what's native and what's not native. Certainly a native species is something you would find locally right here growing in the ground that Mother Nature provided, not something that we added. So native is still native, but nativar to me is simply, you know, man finding a different colored flower in the wild, perhaps naming it, or taking a native plant that we find here in Western Washington and hybridizing it, different leaves, different flower color, you know, a lot of options we'll talk about in the class, but certainly it's a derivative of a native plant. Yes, it provides some of the same benefits to our local ecosystem, but it isn't exactly native. So that's kind of the discussion, the debate that's up to you to decide which way you want to go. Kind of as an example, I didn't want to show this because we don't have very many. We'll have them again in fall, but I just bought one of these yesterday. So if we take Evergreen Huckleberry, we would find that all over here in Western Washington, all the way to the coast, edge of the mountains, all over the place. Delicious berries to eat, grows native. But we have something like this variegated form. If you can see the leaves, very cool foliage, has all the same attributes, gets the same dark blackberry, grows the same. It is the same, but it's got a different leaf. It was named Cascade Delight, really cool variegated evergreen huckleberry, but certainly something you wouldn't find out walking in the woods, but grows just like a native. So that's a great example of kind of what you want to consider a nativar, you know, as we go through the class. So let's go. I'm going to share my screen here and kind of show you a few slides. Give me 1 second. There we go. So if we kind of talk a little bit about some basics here, and then we'll show you some pictures. You know, why go native or nativar? You know, if we kind of talk natives in general, you know, it's a great way to add diversity to your garden and landscape. You know, here in Western Washington, it's going to provide all kind of benefits for wildlife, for birds, for pollinators, for all the things that belong here in Western Washington: shelter, food, water. You can really create kind of a little backyard wildlife habitat. We have one here at the nursery. I have one at my house where you're welcoming in our local, you know, kind of flora and fauna to hang out in your yard a little bit by utilizing natives. You know, an easy way to think of this is, you know, a native belongs here in Western Washington. It's already suited to our climate. It's native to our specific region, so it can deal with our weather patterns, what happens, wet winters, dry summers, you know, on and on. It's a plant that belongs here in the first place. So natives will typically thrive, or nativars, in yards because it is something that is made here for Western Washington. You know, if you know, kind of the reasons why I would think, you know, why go native or nativar, you know, again, these plants naturalize very easily because they belong here. So if we get the right plant in the right place, sun, shade, drainage, you know, kind of mimic like we would find them in the wild here, there's something that'll naturalize very easily and take minimal care. You know, many of the times, dry slopes, you know, hot areas, probably some tougher spots to plant in our landscapes. Maybe we consider a native type plant that would cover areas like that. Slough, creeping Oregon grape, you know, a lot of different natives or nativars that would suit that purpose, and again require less maintenance, a little less water, and do the job for erosion control. You're always going to aid in pollinator diversity and health for our region. I mean, if we have a nice mix of natives that bloom in the different times of the year, or nativars, then we will accomplish that to keep our pollinators happy here locally in our climate. You know, many, again, you know, we've had a great summer this year. It's been incredibly dry, warmer than normal. Everybody who's here knows and probably smiling like, turn off the heat. I didn't need 112 degrees in Western Washington. But, you know, these are, again, plants that are drought tolerant a lot of times. You know, we're always very wet for 6, 7, 8, 9 months of the year. And in that 3-month interval in the summer, very Mediterranean, very dry, not a lot of regular rain, that will keep our plants happy. So if we don't have to supplement with a lot of extra irrigation, we can kind of let these things fend for themselves a little bit more than ornamentals in our yard. You know, again, just, you know, I talked at the beginning, you know, what is a nativar? Because it's kind of a funny term. I don't even know if you put it in your Google search engine, if it would even come up with any kind of reasonable definition. But essentially, that's what it is to me, a cultivar of a native plant bred by man for a particular trait or improvement on the species. You know, we can go through a bazillion improvements: disease resistance, drought tolerance, different flower color. You saw the variegated leaves. Maybe it's a different foliage color on there. Lots of reasons why nativars are produced, but typically they're bred by man. You know, say I'm a grower and I'm growing, you know, 10,000 evergreen huckleberry seedlings at my nursery. I walk out one year and I see a variegated leaf. You know, nature is always going to try to hybridize and mutate a bit. So if I walk out one year and I find a plant with a different color flower, a different color leaf, variegated foliage, I might pull that aside and see if it's stable, start propagating off of that plant. Wow, we've got a really consistent, nice looking ornamental that's a relative of a native. You know, we've got a new nativar. We can put a name on it like Cascade Delight, and boom, we've got a brand new huckleberry. You know, sometimes we mentioned at the beginning, sometimes things are found. You know, as we go through the slides, and I'll tell you a few stories on some of these plants where somebody found that out in nature. Is it all over the place? No, but one particular plant in a certain location may mutate or sport into something a little bit different, where we have a different needle, a different leaf, a different color flower. So then again, we've got a new variety to look at. Plants found in the wild sometimes are renamed as a variety specific, like a flower color. You'll see out, you know, foxgloves all the time, multiple color flowers in the woods, you know, all kinds of natives that are a little bit different. Maybe everybody doesn't see that color, but certainly we have a consistent plant that continues to bloom that color. We can give it a brand new name, and we've got a new nativar or cultivar of a native. So, you know, again, the gist of this, to me, I'll let you decide, you know, what is truly native. Is it the same as a nativar? You know, I don't think so. It's not strictly native, but it's up to you to kind of decide in your own yard. Do you want to go strictly native, or do we want to include some of these cultivars of native plants? I volunteer down to help at the Arboretum here in Everett. If you haven't been, it's a fabulous garden, Evergreen Arboretum and Gardens, right down at Legion Park here in North Everett. You know, we installed, we have a native plant walk that is strictly natives. It's a fabulous garden to walk through. We also have a Natavar trail, so that connects right into a Natavar trail. So you can see the same types of plants, but more colorful leaves, different blooms, all the things we'll talk about if you wanted to look at some demonstrations of a few nativars down in our garden down there as well, okay? So again, if we just kind of review, you know, we're not going to magically create a bunch of nativars for no reason, but these are some of the things that, you know, running this nursery and choosing what plants we carry, these are some of the things that I would consider on what we want to offer to our customers here. You know, is the plant better? Is it a longer season of bloom? Does it repeat flower? You know, that would be a huge bonus as an ornamental in our yards if we have a native type plant that blooms longer or repeats in flower. Does it have fragrance? Is it a different color flower? That's certainly a common one we see as well. A big one with me being a, kind of an anti-spray guy and more organic, is it disease resistant or more insect resistant? Sometimes that'll be a trait that's selected for on certain plants. Is it tidier, more compact, dwarf, slower? You'll see a lot of options for that in our slides of giant conifers that may be native here, and we have dwarf cultivars or nativars that we can utilize. Is it lower maintenance versus the species, or is it the same? That would give us the same traits of that native, but in something that's a little more man-made. Bark color, a lot of times we'll look at some cool vine maples that have some striking bark color that, yes, I wouldn't find out in the wild if I'm out hiking, but vine maples absolutely native here. Why not utilize some of the other cultivars or nativars of vine maple in our landscape? And then again, one for us that we use a lot here towards fall, is it heavier berry production, different colored berries, bigger berries. A lot of plants that we'll show on the slide here will exhibit some of those qualities as well. So if we kind of breeze through a few plants here, and we'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards, and we look at some of the natives that we would find here in Western Washington towards the coast, and again, some man-made varieties of those. If we take a plant called Louisia, it's a great little succulent you would find native up North Cascades, all over kind of rocky slopes, hot, dry, gravelly, sandy locations. We would not find the Sunset series or the Rainbow series. We'd find some very attractive colors or natural colors of Louisia out in the native wild, but it's a great plant to consider if you've got hot, dry areas, rockery slopes. I have some of those tucked in my rockery, outstanding flowers, and something I don't have to water much. So we can look at a plant like Louisia as a great example of the Natavar and get different flower colors, a little bit longer bloom season, and still take advantage of the same traits of the native. Bleeding hearts, we have more of a cut leaf bleeding heart native here in Western Washington that we would see out hiking in the spring when they're blooming. But certainly bleeding heart is an ideal plant for our Western Washington kind of woodland garden. So we can take that name bleeding heart and perhaps look at a couple different species or nativars of bleeding heart that you would find at a nursery that have a more attractive flower, a little different leaf color. One of my favorite plants in the whole nursery every year is the gold heart, bleeding heart, gold foliage. You can see the same flower there that we would expect on bleeding heart. Great for the bees or early blooming. I have this in my yard. We have them here at the nursery in our gardens. It's very attractive perennial that gives me the look of that native bleeding heart, but again, a little nicer foliage and a little different flower. Valentine, exactly the same way. Maybe I don't want the pinky bleeding heart, but I want a red one. Valentine will give me that striking contrast of the scarlet with the white, and it looks just like a bleeding heart on that one. You have to say. So you'll find others as well, but that's just a couple good examples of kind of nativars of bleeding heart. Again, I showed you the variegated huckleberry, but there's some really cool huckleberry derivatives out there. Box huckleberry, I kind of cheat and put that in because I like the plant, but that would be native more in the Midwest, the Appalachian Mountains, but very similar climate. It's one plant we saw a lot of here because it's a very flat, low-growing huckleberry. Same delicious dark blue-black berries if you like to throw them on the ice cream. But that's one that we would be evergreen, low, spreads a little bit like kind of a shrublet, turns great red in the fall, but doesn't drop its leaves. So that would be an evergreen as well. But something I think if you added that in, no, it's not native to Western Washington, but I think it would give you that native look. And it's a great choice to kind of mix in with some of our native huckleberries for something a little bit lower. Scarlet Ovation would be just like the Cascade Delight, the variegated one I showed you. The Canadians bred this out a number of years ago, and it's just a tighter, dwarfer evergreen huckleberry. It's still Vaccinium ovatum, but it's got much more intense red and a more compact habit that maybe is a little more liking to what you want in your yard. It makes a great little clipped hedge. I can grow it in sun and shade. Certainly a very worthwhile plant that would give you those native traits on a really good nativar as well. Choke cherries, again, we don't see A lot of this in Western Washington, a little bit more Eastern Washington. But again, I like to throw them in with the native Nativar type classes because I think they're a great all year plant, offer a lot of little fruits for our birds and wildlife as they produce in the fall. And we've kind of gotten away some options of smaller, more landscape homeowner type aronias or choke cherries versus big, tall, massive shrubs or small trees like we were stuck with a couple decades ago. So if we take aronia, Proven Winners has bred out a number of different dwarf ones. Low Scape, Low Hedger, Low Mound is another one. Very attractive white bloom. I get that dark black choke cherry in the fall. Unbelievable fall color. If you like the fall season like me, these will turn fabulous colors when we get towards fall. But something more manageable for a landscape. You know, would look very native, offer some food to the birds. Great fall color, deciduous, dormant in the winter, but extremely hardy and a little bit more manageable in size on some of these Nativars to use in the landscape. On the taller side, you know, these are your bigger choke cherries. So a red one like Brilliantissima, you can see the fall color in that picture, little red bunches of the choke cherries hanging. That's a very attractive larger grower. Or if I want to go with black choke cherry, we would look at something like Viking. That was named years ago. Again, more of a shrubby, larger grower. Great fall color, nice fruit set, white spring bloom, just like all of them. But certainly would fit in very well with that kind of native or Nativar type garden again. If we look at some Leucothoeas, you know, that's kind of a funny name. I don't know what else to call it because we've heard it called dog hobble and all kinds of funny names. I just like Leucothoea. You don't have to spell it if you just remember that name. It's very easy to remind us of all these coast Leucothoeas. We would find plain Leucothoea axillaris up and down the coast, you know, Washington, Oregon, all over the Pacific region here. A great little evergreen plant, white spring bloom, kind of has a little bit of an archy habit to it. But I like Leucothoea for the foliage color. The bloom's nice in spring, but it's a great winter plant. We go towards fall, winter time, the foliage is going to turn great colors without dropping their leaves. So it's a great kind of dry, little drought tolerant, does shade, part shade, sun. You can really grow that just about anywhere. A great little filler plant. Lots of good varieties out on Leucothoea these days, and there's more, it seems like, coming from the breeders every year. Little Flames is a smaller one, a little smaller leaf, and you can just see, if you look close at that picture, the different colored foliage. That would be something probably taken towards fall when we have some reds, some oranges, some purples, some different colors coming out on that tip. Very attractive evergreen to look at in the winter. Then we're back to springtime, more green with all of the hot orange foliage growth every season. Rejoice is a newer one. We'll have that in here again this fall. If you like more towards the purple, that's one with a little bigger leaf, a little broader growth habit, but I would have some really purple foliage on that. On, again, a nice drought tolerant shrub that's evergreen that I could plant in multiple locations in my landscape. A couple other ones, we've had Scarletta for years. That's a very popular plant around here. You know, something that grows maybe 3 feet tall, maybe a little bit wider. It's easy to prune, but you can see that intense burgundy red foliage color. That's always going to have a little bit of that year round, but specifically in the winter, as we start to get frosty in the fall, that whole color will intensify. And I can look out in my garden with all the greens we have in Washington and have something with red that really pops in the landscape during the winter season as well. Twisting Red, very similar to that in color, a little slower growing. You can see the leaves got a little twist to it, a little different texture. Certainly we could grow this as a shrub in those same locations, excuse me, but that's one, we have a lot of people use those in containers. So say you're down here in the late summer, fall, looking to revamp your container gardens to look sharp all through the winter. That's a plant we'll carry in starts or small pots that look awfully nice tucked in to a nice container by the door for the winter months, and then something we could always plant back out in the yard later as well. If we look at Columbines, you know, again, a little bit more in the mountains or eastern Washington, but lots of cool Columbines around. If you like a little spring flower, that's a great pollinator plant again. The little lanterns is very close to our native species, just a little smaller. Usually Aquilegia formosa is the one that we would find more in Western Washington a little bit. Little lanterns would be a derivative off of that. Just a nice little tight, super short columbine. If I want a little pop of color come that April, May time frame, it's very easy to bloom, and that one will take a little more shade than most columbines will as well. Now, if we get into Western columbines, which is usually more, again, Eastern Washington heading over towards the Rocky Mountain states, lots of options for those. I put origami on here. We could pick 5 or 6 different series where I can find blues, reds, pinks, yellows, all the colors we would like on a columbine flower, but find something, again, a little bit more man-made or kind of a Natavar. Now, juniper always makes me smile because you say juniper and usually we hear the eesh. I don't know about juniper because you were stuck with the old, tam junipers back in the 70s and 80s that buried everything. Juniperus communis, or common juniper would again be native all over the east side of our state, Eastern Oregon. Very hot, dry, tolerant, probably towards the top of the drought list of things that we're looking at today. But Juniperus communis will get a nice berry. It's easy to grow if we have good drainage and good sun. And, Juniperus communis would be a big, kind of craggy, cool, wild-looking tree if we found those over in Baker City or Eastern Washington somewhere a little bit different. These would be, again, nativars or man-made cultivars of Juniperus communis. Pencil point, beautiful little formal, nice shape. Some people call that compressa or pencil point juniper. Looks just like the tip of a pencil, maybe 2 feet wide, 6 or 8 feet tall as it gets old. A great one for a hot, dry spot in the yard if you want a little bit of a vertical accent without eating up a lot of space side to side. Pencil point juniper gives you some silver, some green, some blue, some nice needle color, nice little berry on it like all junipers get. And you can make some gin from those berries if you like gin. That's how we get our gin from the juniper berry. Berkshire would be a ground cover style. So I found that picture kind of tucked in rocks. If I had a hot, dry slope, an area I don't water much, I could utilize some lower creeping species of Juniperus and try some of those nativars. Berkshire, Blueberry Delight. There's a whole bunch of them out there that have that nice needle color. They're drought tolerant. They take the sun. But now I'm going to cover up some area. We talked a little bit earlier about dry slopes. That's a great option if you wanted something evergreen that'll root and stabilize and cover some areas that are hot and dry and maybe a little bit slopey as well. We look at filberts. Western hazelnut grows all over the woods here, blooms out late winter. You get the nuts on there. The squirrels probably take most of them from me in the fall for the winter stash. But hazelnut's a native plant of Washington. If we take kind of that to the next level and look at some ornamental type hazelnuts, most folks really like contorted filbert or contorted hazelnut. These are plants you can see that would have twisty, branchy. I put 2 big pictures on here to kind of show you in the season. Something like Red Dragon would give me the dark foliage. I've got all the interest in the branch. I'm full of leaves. If I look in the wintertime, still a really cool plant. I'm going to see all that fun twisting stems. I'll see the catkins or the flowers that are kind of pinkish in color drop down in February, March. Then I'll have that fun shape to enjoy during the growing season as well. The big thing with filbert up here is Filbert Blight. And green contorted filberts typically might get from our native ones. If you live greenbelt especially, these red leaf ones like this are extremely immune to Filbert Blight. So if you like the contorted filbert, look at nativars like Red Dragon, Red Majestic. There's a number of them that we tend to get off and on during the year that would be a little bit more disease resistant on that side. If we look at some dogwoods, we drive around here in Western Washington in that May time frame, the sides of the freeways, the woods, we'll see those big, tall, 30, 40-foot dogwoods with the massive white flowers. So that's Cornus nutalii or Pacific dogwood. That's a native tree here on the upper Pacific coast, upper left USA, I say. So we've got options for natives. Now, I'll be honest with you, Cornus nutalii is really prone to dogwood anthracnose. It tends to get leaf issues, probably never kills them, but if you go visit that dogwood in July, typically the tips of the leaves are curled up. There's some leaf drop. It's got spotting on it. So what man has done, again, in the Natavar side of these things, Rutgers University back east has taken that native Pacific dogwood, crossed it with Korean dogwoods to get hybrids now of Pacific dogwoods. So we get the disease resistance and the cleaner foliage as part of the Korean parentage, but we get the large flower and the native species as part of the Pacific parentage. So I have Venus in my yard. That was when I chose a dogwood about 20 years ago. I put it in Venus in my yard because I liked the idea of the massive, almost dinner plate flowers. I wanted white, excuse me, had room for a big tree. So I chose that as my Natavar. Venus is a great big white flowered variety that, yes, down the road will get 25, 30 feet tall. It's a big tree in my yard, but it's magnificent, some shade underneath, and I get spectacular flower every spring on those. Starlight is the other one we see around. We go through a lot of those too. Just a little bit smaller white flower, still very large, but it gives me that look of the native Pacific dogwood as a Natavar again. Great fall color, much cleaner foliage, much more consistent, larger bloom. We look at some elderberries. We would see a different species of elderberries native out here in the woods. If you probably sent me a picture of one, you're like, what is this taking over my back shade garden? Could be an elderberry. They grow pretty aggressively here in Western Washington. We've got some awesome Natavar or man-made varieties of elderberry. We can still get the fruits on it. If we get two species, we can pick two different ones and get our he and our she and still have something for the birds to eat in the fall. Red berries, blueberries, there's a couple different types like that. But the main thing, I think, with these Natavars would be foliage color. I'm looking to really pop with a nice large shrub and show off some foliage. Black lace would give me that cut, dark black purple leaf. If I have that in sun, that's a really pretty plant all season that goes deciduous in the winter. But we've seen black lace, typically you can prune them and keep them in that 6-8 foot range. You could almost have black lace as a small tree. We certainly have seen them 10, 12, even 15 feet tall on an old plant. So make a nice specimen plant if you have the room, or again, something that's very easy to prune down each spring and keep much smaller as well. But black lace, black beauty, black tower, maybe I want something a little bit narrower. There's some great Natavars of that dark leaf elderberry. On the right there, I put an instant karma. That's from Proven Winners. Now I introduce a variegated leaf. So the same flower, get the berries on it, but now I've got something, if we like a little variegation, we've got the yellowy, creamy edge on a green foliage that would add a little bit more interest during the gardening season as well. I didn't put the yellow one on here, but you should also take a peek at the lemon lace or lemony lime lace. There's some great golden foliage elderberries as well, if you like a little bit of gold foliage. We look at currants. Red flowering currant is always an early spring native staple here in Western Washington. One of the best plants to get the hummingbird nectar early in the season. These are always blooming out in our woods and all over our area, here coming out in that mid-March to early April time frame. We can certainly, I think all red flowering currants are the same. I'm going to be honest, I couldn't tell apart the one I found in the woods, or we would have one here called King Edward. That's usually the cultivated name of red flowering currant most nurseries would have. You're not going to tell the difference between those two, but you'll see a number of different Natavars, Paul's Bow Scarlet, the King Edward I mentioned, white icicle if I wanted to get a white currant, little different color in there. Same growth habit, same fall color yellow. They're all deciduous. They grow about the same as far as size, but it would give me, again, that look of the native on a named cultivar that's probably a little bit heavier blooming, maybe a bit brighter on the flower. We look at foxgloves. I mentioned those earlier. It's a great natural wildflower around here in Western Washington. We'll see foxgloves blooming all over the place each year. Keep in mind, foxgloves is one of those kind of funny plants that we would call a biennial. So these last for 2 years, and unless we allow the seed to drop, repropagate new plants for us, we'll have that original plant for 2 years only, and it disappears, and then we hope we have the seed to keep the generations going. I've had foxglove in my little native garden for years on the back of my house in pure shade, and I think I skipped 1 year and thought I lost them all a number of years ago, but 1 year went by and here they come again. So by allowing those flowers to mature and drop the seed, we'll have some fresh propagation. Now, the point of the foxglove is I probably wouldn't find any of these colors or that big of a flower out in the wild. It's still foxglove. It's for pollinators. It has all the same traits as our native foxglove, but these have been bred for flower colors. So a lot of times when you come down here, you'll see mixes, the Arctic series mix, the Camelot mix. There's a whole bunch of them around. And when you select your foxglove, you can see them blooming and say, oh, I like the rose, or I like more of the yellow, or I want the peach, or I like a little darker. You can pick your flower color that way and still have exactly the same look as a native foxglove. Lupins, the same exact discussion. A biennial, needs to drop seed. These are more for the sun, whereas our foxglove would be more for shade. But I could drive a lot of places, especially up towards the mountains and again, eastern Washington, and see wild lupin blooming all over the place. I'm never going to see the colors that I'm showing you here because, again, these are nativars or man-bred flower colors. But certainly a lupin is a plant that's good for pollinators, easy to grow, drought tolerant, and something that would give us the look of the native again. Every year there's more of these huge lupins coming out. We seem to get a new series in just about every season. West County was actually bred over in England, and there's all kinds of color combinations. That one there, I believe, is popsicle. I've got orange with yellow. You got masterpiece. I mean, we go on and on. If you looked up on your computer, West County lupin, you'll see a bunch of different options as far as the flower colors. Same with the staircase series. We had these in this year, a much, much larger flower, and I can get pretty much any color in the rainbow to show off the lupin flower. Again, the pollinators, all the same benefits, but I would not find those colors out in the native ground. A couple larger shrubs. You know, years ago, excuse me, you know, if we had to go back to history lesson, you know, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Clark explored the West here about, what, 220 years ago or so. And they found a lot of plants. The first plant I showed you is Louisia. Why do you think they called it that? Because Mr. Meriwether Lewis found it up in the Cascade Mountains and named it. We have blizzard mock orange. That is Philadelphus Louisii, a species named after him. We would find that mock orange growing native, especially eastern Washington into Idaho, eastern Oregon, a lot of areas around here. That's native mock orange here to the Pacific Northwest. We take that plant, and man has created a variety called blizzard. It would look just like our native mock orange, all the same traits, but it's just heavier blooming. That's a really heavy, sweet orange blossom smelling plant that blooms out there in that, you know, late May, June, early July timeframe. Ours just finished blooming here at the nursery. But if you like that native mock orange, you would get the Nativar called blizzard. That's the one that we typically carry here every single season. We'll have it again in 2022. We still have some around right now. Same with sumac. You know, sumac, Staghorn Sumac's got a bunch of names. We would find those growing, frankly, in some roadside ditches over east of the mountains in Idaho and all the same kind of hotter, drier locales again. They do great here in Western Washington as well. But Tiger Eyes is one introduced by Bailey Nurseries back in Minnesota years ago. That's part of their first edition shrub program, one of our grower partners. Tiger Eyes is one. We get spectacular foliage. I mean, again, most of my classes, I always admit, I love yellow leaves. I think they pop in our landscapes here with all the greens we have native. Something like Tiger Eyes is going to make a really nice statement in the landscape. Nice, limey, bright yellow foliage all through the season. And then I turn spectacular colors in the fall, the reds, the oranges, the purples, different shades in between. Gets a nice flower on it in the fall. And they call it Staghorn Sumac because it's kind of got a funny antler-looking branch pattern. They're real fuzzy. They're kind of fun to touch when they're dormant, but this would be a deciduous one. Great fall color, dormant for the winter, and then right up again, we pop in spring. You know, be careful with sumac. This is a plant that will spread a bit. If you have some room, let that grow and kind of naturalize. Won't get super tall, but it'll form a nice wide specimen in the yard. You can always go take out stems. You can take a shovel to it, say that's enough, you know, cut a stem off if it's getting a little bit wide, but certainly something we're not going to be super tight and compact. We would give that a little bit of room to naturalize or grow side to side. Love 9-barks. You know, this is a plant. We have some in the gardens here. I have this at my house. Pacific 9-bark is a little bit different than Eastern 9-bark, but 9-bark is a Pacific native. These particular varieties, again, were bred for foliage color. Excuse me. If we were out in the woods, we would find green foliage 9-bark. This is Physocarpus, would be our Latin name to this. If we go to a nursery like Sunnyside, we would find some great foliage varieties, burgundies, oranges, yellows, reds, a lot of stuff in between. It's got a cute little flower. Excuse me. They get a nice seed on there, a bright scarlet seed where the flower was here in late summer. These have really cool peeling, exfoliating bark. So to me, they add something all seasons of interest. This is a shrub I think looks good all year. Excuse me. If we look at the two I put up here, Fireside is a variety introduced from Bailey, first editions again. That would give me that real dark purple black foliage on a nice sized plant, about 6-8 feet tall or so. Amber Jubilee would get me towards the orangey tone. When those leaf out in the spring, it almost looks like the color of marmalade. Then in the summer, we go green, marmalade, some purple, some different colors mixed in there as well. But same bloom, same seed, same growth habit. Those will take quite a bit of sun and quite a bit of dry. So this is, again, one that we could use as drought tolerant. I have mine out on my south-facing bank as a nice specimen, kind of blocking a little bit of my neighbor's view into my yard, to be honest. And it's one, I haven't watered it once this year. I'll be perfectly honest. I water my bank on occasion every couple of weeks, but it's down at the far end, and it has not gotten one specific drop of water out of my hose or water bill, and it looks good as new. Still happy as can be down there, getting ready to turn nice color for fall, show off the bark in the winter, and then off we go for another season. There are some good dwarf ones too. So maybe I don't have room, you know, for a 6, 8, 10 foot tall 9-bark, but I want something maybe more 4 or 5 feet tall. Look for Little Devil, Little Joker. There's a whole bunch of good varieties of dark leaf dwarf 9-bark as well. If we look at some conifers here, you know, mountain hemlock, Tsuga mertensiana is a plant that's native here in Washington. We have it all over the western side of the Cascade Mountains. You'll hike through lots of mountain hemlock if you do some hiking up around here. You know, it's a really cool tree. Kind of looks alpine-y, kind of like alpine fir, but a little bit fuller and I think a little bit easier to grow. You know, I put it on here because of the blue. You know, we can find some really cool cultivars of mountain hemlock. They grow really slow. They're not easy to come by, but we've got stuff like Mount Hood Blue or Glacier Peak, named after a local mountain up here. These are all cultivars of mountain hemlock or nativars that, yes, we probably wouldn't find the blue out hiking in the woods, but it's identical in the tree. I just would like to add a little bit of powder blue color to my conifer versus the typical green would be the only difference. On the right there, it kind of looks like cousin it. We call him Thorson's Weeping Hemlock. Now that's a variety of western hemlock, Tsuga heterophila, and that's a plant that we would find, again, all over our area. Western hemlock grows all up and down western Washington. It's a 60, 80-foot tree. Most people probably would not come down to the nursery and say, give me a western hemlock. I have the room for that. But if you like the idea of the native, take out a weeping cultivar or natavar of that western hemlock like Thorson's. Really cool plant that's manageable in size that I could add to my landscape, get the look, the texture, the feel of the western hemlock without having a massive tree. We look at some pines. Now, these are a couple of our favorites around, especially in the winter time and spring, but both of these are cultivars of lodgepole pine. Shore pine, lodgepole pine are almost identical. We would have more shore pine here in Western Washington towards the coast, more lodgepole up towards the mountain areas. Now, if we look at these, is a great example. I talked earlier about, you know, who made this? Where was it found? You know, Chief Joseph would look like any other lodgepole pine you've ever seen. All green, grows kind of narrow, real slow, doesn't get super big like the species does. But that thing in the winter, that's a picture right there that would be taken in December, January. When we get cold in the fall, that entire pine turns a iridescent yellow. And you want something that pops in the landscape in the winter. Chief Josephs aren't easy to find. They tend to be a little spendy because they're very hard to propagate. But that's about the coolest plant you can have for a golden conifer. We will have a bunch of Chief Josephs in the fall. Don't call or email today. That's a plant at the nursery. You'll always find a few different styles to have for fall, not much else the time of year. They usually come in and sell out pretty quickly. But Chief we will have here about mid-September again here for fall planting. On the right is another lodgepole pine called Taylor Sunburst. We'll have these again. I think we'll have a couple in the fall, but we will for sure have this one again come spring. Again, a little bit spendy, really cool and worth the money, but kind of a fun plant if you like that lodgepole pine look. This is one that would be green, but now I have bright gold new growth. So every spring I can walk out and see my tree looking like that. You know, that's going to be like a late April, May, June kind of thing. As we get our new candles on that pine, it's going to pop with some really nice yellow in the landscape. I've seen some fabulous specimens of both of these driving around in different yards all over our area, and both really cool nativars of our native lodgepole pine. Now, if we go to Oregon grape, you know, Oregon grape is something that we use a lot. Creeping Oregon grape, leatherleaf Oregon grape, compact Oregon grape, all kinds of different Oregon grapes or Mahonias that we would use in our landscapes as a native. They're all over the Pacific Northwest, including Western Washington. Always get a really nice yellow, nectar-rich flower. They call it grape because it looks like it gets a bunch of kind of small bluish purple grape clusters on there when it's done. It's not a grape, but it does get the fruit for the wildlife on there. Now, I want to be clear, these are not Mahonia aquifolium. That is our native species, but these crosses or hybrids of Mahonia, to me, should be included in the Natavar discussion. They're really fun plants, the same attributes, evergreen, take some sun, take some shade, highly nectar-rich flowers for the hummingbirds and pollinators in the winter time when they bloom. These bloom at the opposite time of year. But these will be some different ones that will give you the look of an Oregon grape, but not be Oregon grape, if that makes sense. So a couple that we tend to keep around, Soft Caress is one. If you know Oregon grape, some people call it hollyleaf grape. They get kind of spiny. They're a little prickly when you touch them or get the leg on them when you're out working. Soft Caress would be one that's much softer foliage. You can see almost a tropical looking lacy foliage on a nice evergreen shrub. And that one would be blooming in like November. So if I wanted something to keep my hummingbirds happy as we get into fall, I plant something like Soft Caress. That's one of the earlier blooming hybrid Mahonias that would give me that nectar and that flower in that late fall, kind of early winter time frame. If I take the one on the right, well, let's do this. Soft Caress, a little bit smaller too, but you'll have a nice bush, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet when you get an older one. I've used that in containers as well. I think that's a great container plant to use on the half shade, half sun kind of porch, or in a nice pot that you can enjoy, something evergreen. Charity is a much bigger one. There's Charity, there's Winter Sun, there's Lionel, there's a whole bunch of varieties of these cross media or Asian type Mahonias. You know, these are big plants. You know, this is going to be a nice large shrub up there, 6-8 feet tall, 6-8 feet wide, sometimes even a little taller as they mature. But again, I've got evergreen, I've got that same kind of Mahonia foliage and a whole lot of those sweet nectar-rich yellow flowers over the winter. This one, more like December, January flower, usually in the dead of winter, we would get some action on like charity. Everybody knows around here azaleas and rhodies are native, so we'll touch on a couple of those. But I put a couple up here. Our Western azalea, or Rhododendron occidental, all azaleas are rhodies after all, you know, gives us some options for color and fragrance. I would find Western azalea growing all over in native areas here in the Pacific Northwest, but I'm probably not going to find Irene Coster. That's one we sell a bunch of here. We have one again on the property. But if I like the pink, I like the fragrance, and I like the idea of a native type Western azalea or Western rhododendron, plants like Irene Coster would be a great Natavar choice, or a cultivar, again, of that Western rhododendron. On the right, I put a simple picture of Rhododendron macrophyllum. I think I took that years ago hiking down the coast redwoods down there in Northern California. But we would find a big leaf rhododendron or Rhododendron macrophyllum all over in the wood areas up and down the entire Pacific coast up here in the Northwest. Yes, you can find named varieties of this, Seven Devils. I've seen a few different color forms out at a native type nursery. But I included this in this discussion because there is like 5,000 rhododendron hybrids. And yes, a lot of them maybe come from China, Japan, different parts of the world as part of their parentage, but a vast majority of them are bred locally here in the Northwest. We're in rhododendron country, and you're going to see parentage of macrophyllum going back centuries that has been used as man creates different, again, nativars or cultivars of rhododendron that have a distinct leaf, growth habit, and flower color. If we look at a couple more conifers here, you know, we mentioned lodgepole pine. We've got shore pine. It's the same idea. Shore pine tends to be a little shrubbier, a little lower. A lot of times when you see them here in the wild in Washington, a little bit more windswept. You know, you walk out to the coast, you would see these growing all over the place, kind of growing out of rocks and hanging out towards the water, whichever way the wind is blowing. I put on, I think, a great Nativar of shore pine called Spawn's Dwarf. You know, that's a great little dwarf, bushy one that would give me the look of that shore pine and almost look like I've bonsaied it without bonsaiing it. It's got nice structure, kind of cloud pruny habit a little bit, but certainly a great little evergreen for hot, dry areas. And the big thing with shore pine, it takes salt. So maybe you're living out on Camino Island or an area here that's right on the water, and you're concerned about salt spray or different conditions in your soil. Something like shore pine will take the salt and still be thriving there in those same locations. The other side there, we've got Sitka Spruce. Now, I've visited the largest Sitka Spruce in the world down near Seaside, Oregon. They're all up and down the coast again, up into British Columbia, all the way into Alaska. We got Sitka, Alaska. But Sitka Spruce is a massive tree. You know, I think the one down there in Oregon's up about 200 feet, if I recall. I couldn't tell you how big the trunk was, but I could park my truck in front of it. It was almost the size of a redwood. But Sitka Spruce is not one, again, you'll probably find, you know, the native species at a lot of nurseries, but you'll find some great dwarfs. You know, these are all plants that are Sitka Spruce, have all the same attributes, but just a tidier growth habit. We get one, I love to say it, called Silbersperg. You know, that's a fun one to say if you like a little German. But Silbersperg, you can see the color. I've got silver, I've got blue, I've got green, the same attributes of the needle of the Sitka. But now I've got something that's going to grow on a very small scale, you know, a lot slower growth rate and a much tidier habit. I could have that in my landscape and not worry about having a 200-foot tree, you know, decades down the road. So some great dwarf ones. Silbersperg, Papoose is another one that we tend to have around. So if you like that native, you know, kind of conifer, the Sitka Spruce, check out some of the really cool dwarf nativars of that. We look at Symphyocarpus, we call it, or Snowberry. You know, you've walked around, I'm sure, and seen in the fall, roadside ditches all over the place. You're going to see those bare plants with those little clusters of white berries hanging on them. That's Snowberry, you know, a little bit different species, again, than we talk about with nativars, but it's the same idea. And plants like this were bred for massive bloom and massive berry production. So if you like that interest of having the summer bloom and a really heavy crop of bright berries towards the late summer, fall into winter, some of these varieties or Nativars of Symphyocarpus may do nicely for you. Both of these are out of Bailey's first edition shrub program. We've had them here for a number of years now. We just got a bunch of these in. This is one of our favorites here as we get towards late summer, fall. I can do candy if I want something real bright pink. They're just starting to form the berries on them right now. They're blooming. And then we have Galaxy, which I would challenge you, looks exactly like our native Snowberry. I would have a pure white berry on there. Great fall color. They're deciduous, and they're plants that are very easy to maintain. If you have this in your yard, let's plant one, let it grow for the whole year. It blooms on new wood. It produces the berries. Come that next spring, we can just cut back the twigs or mound it down a little bit to keep the plant size down. Up we come again in the spring, and we do the same thing again for 2022. We bloom on new wood, off with the berries, and we've got kind of a cool plant for that late summer, fall, winter interest neighborhood on this Natavar. Twig Dogwoods, you know, another one. I could drive a block either direction here and I would find a twig dogwood growing in a wet ditch somewhere. This is one that naturalizes very well, especially in the kind of wet, heavy clay, you know, those type of situations here in Western Washington where we do get a little bit wet, especially in the wintertime. This is a plant that will not matter at all. You know, am I going to find variegated out in the wild? No. Am I going to find yellow foliage? No. But I would find green foliage, red twig dogwood growing all over the area. So we put some Nativars on here. I have both of these in my yard because I like the twig dogwood. Bright red twigs in the winter when we're dormant, great fall color. But now I've added spring and summer interest to me. I've got something with a very attractive leaf. So gold one like Neon Burst. We've got these in ready to go right now. You know, the yellow foliage will pop in the landscape. When it turns color, I get pinks and reds and purples and oranges, all kinds of colors in the fall. It goes dormant. I'm left with really bright scarlet wood and those little clusters of the white berries for the birds. That's a great one to feed the wildlife. Same on the right, Ivory Halo. This has been out for years. I've got two of them now. I ended up adding another one because I liked it. But this is a plant I would just add the variegation. You know, it's the same as red twig dogwood, but now instead of more green in my landscape, I've added the variegated, the silver white with the green center, and I've got a really attractive plant during the spring and summer months as well. Vine maple, you know, everybody's seen vine maples around. Pacific Fire is going to give me the bark color. We've got some around. You have to come see them to believe them. Same exact plant as vine maple, same leaf, fall color, size, nothing changes. But now when I'm dormant, I can look out in my yard and see something with yellowy, orangey, coral colored wood. So I've added that winter interest with something like Pacific Fire vine maple. We've got some great big burgundy jewels around right now. If you have that in sun, that's my leaf color all during the summer. So again, instead of just more green, now I've got a native vine maple. In this Nativar, I would have that dark burgundy red on all the foliage that's getting the heat of the sun. Ours got great color on them here with the summer heat, and they do not burn. So that is one we can have out in full sun. A couple cedars, you know, Western red cedar is another one we have all over the place here. And there's some great dwarfs, some skinnier ones, some ones that don't get quite as big as our 60, 70 foot native ones either if we don't have the room. So whipcord looks nothing like a Western red cedar, but it is Thuja plicata whipcord. That is a straight found as a sport off of a Western red cedar. That's going to look like dreadlocks, a little shrub with thin hanging needle foliage. We've got some of these in right now. Take a look at them. That's a really fun plant to add to a nice sunny garden. And being a Western red cedar will take a little bit more wet and a little bit heavier clay soil than some of the other things we have to worry about the drainage on, like the pines and things like that. Tiny Tower, Green Giant, Excelsia, you know, I could go on with kind of man-made cultivars of Western red cedar, but look at your options would be my advice. If you don't have room for quite, you know, 60 feet, let's get something that grows a little smaller. Maybe it's the spread. I'd rather have something narrower. Something like Tiny Tower or other varieties will give you that hybrid kind of arborvitae cedar look on something a little bit more manageable in size. Wintergreen, that's a great little ground cover we would see, growing out native here in the Pacific region, but we would have green leaves and nice red berry. There's certainly nothing wrong with the native species. The Nativars or cultivars of it have added bigger berry size, different color berry size, or the variegated foliage. This is another one that keeps its leaves in the winter, so it's an attractive plant year-round. I always bloom in summer and get those berries to develop, so I've got a really cool winter interest plant. Use them as pots, little slow, creepy ground covers in that part shade, part sun location. That's certainly a worthwhile Nativar to consider. And then we've got Yarrow, so that's another kind of Pacific native wildflower. You see these a little bit more, again, east of the mountains, but lots of wildflowers get bred. We don't sell the native yarrow or achillea that we would find over hiking just east of the mountains here, but a lot of cultivars in different colors. I mean, I could pick out a yarrow is a great one for the pollinators, for butterflies in particular, but I can get yellow and orangey and purple and red and white and all the different colors that perhaps I wouldn't see. Typically the native one is yellow. We wouldn't see much variation on that, but we can have that same look of a native using Nativars of yarrow or achillea and getting a different color flower. That's a great little sun perennial. So there's the end of the slides here. Again, thanks for joining us. You'll see our web address on there and our email. If you got any questions, I'll be here all day today, this weekend. You can email us certainly anytime. We're always here to help. Let me quit sharing here just one second. So let's do some questions, Ben. I can't see Ben, but I'm guessing he can probably see me. So,
all right, Trev, great class. A lot of options there. We've got one question here about vine maples. Someone's looking for one that can handle shade and would stay low growing.
Yep. If you want a smaller vine maple, I almost put it on there. Probably the smallest ones I've seen. We have some specimens of it in here. There's one called Little Gem. Vine maple can always take the shade, the part sun, the shade. You can grow vine maple just about anywhere in your yard. I wouldn't worry so much about the sun location, but if you want to go a little smaller, you might look at Little Gem, might be one of the first ones I'd take a peek at. We do have, I don't have anything small on that, but we've got some pretty substantial older specimens of it around.
All right, Trev, we've been hitting most of them as we go here. Anyone else have questions, please type them in real quick. We did have a ton of questions about what plants can handle sun, what can handle shade. We've got a great database on our website that can also answer a lot of those questions for you guys, or always just send us an email or give us a call. But Trev, that's all the questions we have back here, it looks like.
Great. Thank you, Steve. It's helping. The Whistler in there is handling them as we go. So before we clock out here, let me just remind you, class discounts for all the classes here. They'll start here today for the Nativar class and go through next Friday. It's probably your lucky week if you're at the class, because we really don't have any way to segregate out all these little specific plants I talked about. So essentially, if you come down here this week, I say you're at the Nativar class and you're buying perennials and trees and shrubs, you're going to get 20% off your purchase. So we can probably cheat and play like they were all Nativars kind of thing. I will be gone here for a couple weeks, but we will have on August 14th, Holly and Sarah, our greenhouse maestros, will be doing a living wreath class, which is really fun. It will be recorded and posted on Saturday the 14th at 10 a.m. It's kind of one of those project classes. We'll have kits down here for you to check out. You can grab some friends, go back and watch the video anytime, and really make a fun living wreath that you can have outside with succulents, with sedums, with all kinds of fun things that they'll be talking about. I'll be back the last weekend of August. So our next big class after the living wreath is fall grasses, ornamental grasses, and fall perennials. And I'll be teaching that on Saturday, August 28th. So be sure to put that in the calendar and join us. The grass is always one of my favorites. I love ornamental grasses, and that would be a fun class, kind of getting into plumage time in the fall, we call it. All of them are starting to bloom, okay? So we got questions. Thanks again for Ben for helping, and Steve for coming in, and thanks for joining us. We'll hopefully see you here in just a couple weeks, all right? Enjoy the day. Get out and work in the garden. It's a little bit shady again today, which is nice after all the heat. And remember, keep the leaves up and the roots down.